I sat there in that cold hospital bed, my phone still in my trembling hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Elton John tickets for months. My mother's voice rang through the sterile walls of my hospital room, sharper than the pain tearing through my abdomen. It was Christmas Eve, and instead of being surrounded by family, I was in Las Vegas Medical Center, barely holding it together, while my 2-year-old twins, Noah and Ava, played quietly in the corner. The only person showing me an ounce of kindness was my nurse, Danielle, who was checking my vitals. But the real wound? That came from the absolute indifference on my mother's face during our video call. I'm Sophia Bennett, 33 years old, and I've spent my entire life as an afterthought in my own family. My younger sister, Rebecca, has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I couldn't even get my parents to watch their only grandchildren, while I faced emergency surgery for complications stemming from my husband's sudden death 6 months ago. The doctors had found internal bleeding. It was serious. But to my parents, not serious enough to miss their concert or Christmas Eve celebration with Rebecca. And then my father delivered the final blow. You're becoming a real nuisance and burden, Sophia. We're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems. I felt my breath hitch. A burden. That word hit harder than the grief I'd been drowning in for half a year. I had been financially supporting my parents since they took early retirement 3 years ago. Every single month, I sent them $2,500, money that could have gone toward my children's future, but instead helped with their mortgage and expenses. Even after Nathan died, even after my world shattered, and yet, when I needed them the most, they made it painfully clear. I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Tears blurred my vision as I set my phone down, my heart splintering under the weight of their words. That's when Danielle, the only person in that room who seemed to care, gently squeezed my shoulder. My friend Isabel is a professional nanny who specializes in childhood trauma. Let me call her for you. Her kindness contrasted so starkly with my parents' cruelty that I nearly broke down right there. The twins were too young to understand what was happening. They'd already lost their father. If this surgery went wrong, would they lose me too? The thought terrified me, but not as much as leaving them with people who clearly saw them as burdens. With a deep, shaky breath, I made my decision. Yes, please call her, I whispered. And just like that, I started cutting the toxic threads that had bound me to people who had raised me, but had never truly loved me. As I hung up, memories flooded my mind. My entire childhood had been a cycle of being ignored, overshadowed, and dismissed. When I graduated with honors, my parents barely acknowledged it, because Rebecca had landed a role in a local commercial that weekend. When I married Nathan, they complained the venue was too far for their liking. When I had the twins, they acted like I had personally inconvenienced them whenever the babies were too fussy. Nathan had seen it all. He knew that pain, having been estranged from his own father. We'll build our own family, he used to say, one that actually knows how to love, and we did, until 6 months ago, when a drunk driver stole him away, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I battled grief, depression, and loneliness, but despite everything, I still supported my parents. When they complained about inflation, I sent them even more money. I wanted to be the bigger person. I wanted to prove that families stood by each other no matter what. But in the end, the cruel irony was inescapable. I was lying in a hospital bed, bleeding internally, possibly dying, and they couldn't even miss a single concert to help their own grandchildren. Danielle walked back in, her expression softer this time. "Isabel is on her way," she reassured me. "She's amazing with kids." And for the first time that night, I exhaled, because now I knew the truth. Family isn't blood. Family is who shows up, and the people I had been breaking myself for. They weren't family. They were just the people who happened to share my DNA. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was taking control. Isabel had once worked with trauma victims at the children's hospital before becoming a private nanny, and seeing her instantly connect with Noah and Ava reassured me. But as much as I needed help, a gnawing anxiety crept in. How much will this cost? My medical bills were already stacking up thanks to the gaps in Nathan's insurance, and the idea of adding more financial strain made my chest tighten. Danielle, ever the voice of reason, placed a calming hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry about that now. Let's focus on getting you through surgery." But I was worried, and then it hit me. The $2,500 I was set to transfer to my parents next week. Money that should have been helping me and my children, not enabling their selfishness. A fire ignited in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Self-preservation. As the hospital staff prepped me for surgery, I turned to Danielle. "Could you bring me my phone one more time?" With shaking hands, I sent 2 messages. The first was to my bank, canceling every automatic transfer to my parents. The second, a message I should have sent years ago. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthoughts. Don't contact me again." As they wheeled me into the operating room, through all the pain and fear, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The surgery was successful, but the recovery hit harder than expected. 5 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, and through it all, Isabel was a lifesaver. Watching the twins in my hospital room during the day, taking them home at night, making sure they felt safe. When I finally had a clear enough head to check my phone, the screen was flooded with notifications. 27 missed calls, countless unread messages. My parents and Rebecca had finally noticed my absence, but not for the right reasons. The messages followed a predictable cycle: confusion, then anger, then full-blown panic about their mortgage, not a single word asking if I was okay, or how my children were holding up. But my father's last message? That was the final nail in the coffin. "You can't just cut us off like this. We've planned a cruise next month, and the tickets are non-refundable." I nearly laughed. My existence had been reduced to a paycheck. But Rebecca's messages? Those were different. "Mom and Dad just told me you were having some minor procedure. Why are they freaking out about money? What's going on?" It hit me then. My parents had lied to her, downplaying my emergency surgery to justify choosing a concert over their own grandchildren. Still groggy from pain meds, I sent her the full story. Her response came fast. "Oh my God, Sophia, I had no idea. They told me you were being dramatic about a routine checkup. I would have watched the twins if I'd known. I'm so sorry." And I believed her. Rebecca had never been cruel, just raised in an environment where she had always come first. Maybe this was the wake-up call she needed to finally see our parents for who they really were. By the time I was discharged, I had made several decisions. First, I hired Isabel part-time to help with the twins during my recovery. Second, I contacted a lawyer to draft a real will, naming a trusted friend as their guardian if anything ever happened to me. Definitely not my parents. Third, I blocked my parents entirely, leaving Rebecca with limited access while I decided if she could truly change. The financial shift was massive. Cutting off that $2,500, it wasn't just a weight off my shoulders. It meant real security. For the first time since Nathan's death, I could afford proper childcare. I could breathe again. That night, as I lay in my own bed, the twins asleep in their room across the hall, I felt everything at once: anger, grief, relief, clarity. But one feeling overpowered the rest. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself, and I wasn't looking back. Ava clung to my leg, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of my pants, like I was the only thing keeping her safe. And in a way, I was. My mother's saccharine smile wavered as she extended a perfectly manicured hand, trying to lure Ava closer with the promise of gifts. But Ava didn't budge. She didn't know these people. She didn't trust them. And why would she? They had never been there for her. Not when she was born, not when she lost her father, and certainly not when I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. I crouched down, brushing a stray curl from Ava's face, my voice soft but firm. "You don't have to go to anyone you don't want to, sweetheart." She nodded against my shoulder, her grip tightening. I turned my gaze back to my parents, my resolve hardening. You don't get to just show up with presents and expect to play the role of loving grandparents. That's not how this works. My father scoffed. "Oh, come on, Sophia. You're being ridiculous. We're family." "No," I said, standing tall. "Family doesn't turn their backs when you need them most. Family doesn't make you feel like a burden, and they sure as hell don't come knocking only when their bank account is running low." My mother blinked, looking genuinely stunned, as if it had never occurred to her that I might finally stand up for myself. "We made a mistake," she tried again, voice trembling with carefully placed theatrics. "We thought you were overreacting." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You thought I was overreacting? You mean when I was lying in a hospital bed, bleeding internally, begging for your help? When your only response was to yell at me for interrupting your concert plans?" I shook my head. "No, Mom. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice." My father's face was turning red now, his patience gone. "So that's it? You're cutting us off completely?" I met his glare head on. "That's exactly what I'm doing." For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for their approval. I wasn't trying to make them love me the way I had always loved them. I was done. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father clenched his jaw. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he exhaled sharply and grabbed my mother's arm. "Come on," he muttered, turning to leave. "We're wasting our time." As they walked away, my mother glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. But I didn't flinch. I didn't waver. I simply stepped back inside, locked the door, and exhaled. Ava looked up at me, her big, innocent eyes searching mine. "Bad people gone?" she asked softly. I kissed her forehead, holding her close. "Yeah, baby," I whispered. "They're gone." And for the first time in my life, I finally felt free. The next morning, my phone buzzed with another desperate voicemail from my mother, her voice thick with panic. "Sophia, we need your help. The bank is taking our home. Please, we'll do anything. Just call us back." I stared at the screen, expressionless. The same people who had turned their backs on me when I needed them most were now scrambling, expecting me to swoop in and save them. Again. But I was done playing that role. Rebecca, however, wasn't. She called me immediately after, her tone hesitant. "I know you don't owe them anything, but they're freaking out, and honestly, I just don't know what to do." I exhaled, my fingers tapping against the kitchen counter. "Did they ever sell the boat?" I asked. Silence. "Or the timeshare?" More silence. That told me everything I needed to know. "Rebecca, they're not struggling. They're refusing to downsize because they still think I'll bail them out," I said, voice steady. "They want their luxuries, but they don't want the consequences." She sighed. "I know, and honestly, part of me wants to let them drown in their own mess. But it's still hard to see them like this. I softened. Rebecca had spent her entire life being their golden child, shielded from the worst of their manipulation. This was new for her. I get it, but they made their choice. That afternoon, I got a final Hail Mary email from my father. Sophia, let's be reasonable. Family takes care of each other. We took care of you for years, and now you're abandoning us. Attached was a request for a one-time payment of $50,000 to help them get back on their feet. I laughed, actually laughed. The audacity. I had paid them hundreds of thousands over the years, and yet they still felt entitled to more. Without hesitation, I replied, Dad, I suggest selling the boat and timeshare. Good luck. Then, for the first time in my life, I blocked my parents' numbers. The fallout was spectacular. My parents' reputation in the family crumbled as word spread that they had prioritized vacations and luxury over their own daughter's survival. Cousin Eric, the family's unofficial town gossip, made sure everyone knew the real story. Suddenly, my parents weren't the victims anymore. They were reckless spenders who had burned their lifeline. Within weeks, they were forced to sell the boat at a loss, followed by the timeshare. It still wasn't enough. 60 days came and went. The foreclosure went through. My parents lost the house they had been so desperate to keep. Rebecca told me they were staying in a small rental now, far from their old lavish lifestyle. They still don't get it, she said one evening, stirring her tea. They blame you for all of it. I just smiled. Of course they do. But their blame didn't matter anymore. I had broken free. One night, after the twins had gone to bed, I sat on my balcony, breathing in the crisp evening air. My savings were finally growing. My career was thriving. I had real support, real friends, and a future I had built for myself. The weight of my parents' expectations, their endless demands, their manipulation, it was all gone. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace. I stared at my phone, reading my mother's latest text, equal parts disbelief and fury burning through me. We never thought you'd actually cut us off. We assumed you were just angry and would start sending money again after a week or two. That was it. That was all the proof I needed that they had never truly respected me, never even considered that I might be serious about setting boundaries. They had spent years treating my support as their birthright, assuming I'd always cave, but not this time. Meanwhile, my life was finally moving in the right direction. My support group had become more than just a place to vent. It was a lifeline, a network of people who actually understood what I was going through. Through them, I met Diana, a real estate agent and single mom who had lost her husband to cancer. She helped me see possibilities I hadn't even considered. Selling my cramped apartment, moving somewhere more affordable, and finding better childcare options. I'd also started a small business designing memorial websites, inspired by the one I'd made for Nathan. It started as a favor for a friend in the support group, then another, and before I knew it, word had spread. For the first time since losing Nathan, I wasn't just surviving. I had a future to build. And while I was moving forward, my parents were crashing and burning. Their finances had spiraled, their retirement funds depleted thanks to a bad investment Dad made on some golf buddy's advice. Rebecca, who still had some lingering guilt, had agreed to help them review their finances, only to discover the full extent of their reckless spending. They've been lying to everyone, she told me, exasperated. They took out a second mortgage last year, counting on your money to cover it. If they sold the boat and timeshare, they'd be fine. But instead of accepting reality, they doubled down. A few days later, they showed up at my door again. This time they came prepared with spreadsheets. I let them in, but only because I was curious. My father, still trying to play the role of the authoritative patriarch, laid the paperwork on my dining table. "We need $14,000 to catch up on the mortgage and avoid foreclosure," he announced. No pretense, no small talk, just straight to the demand. I leaned back in my chair. What about selling the boat? We'd take a loss. And the timeshare? "The market's bad," my mother added. "Besides, those are our retirement luxuries." I almost laughed. The sheer audacity of it. "Luxuries you can't afford," I pointed out. My father's face hardened. "We could afford them with your help. It's the least you could do after everything we've done for you." That was the moment I knew. He still thought he had control over me. I let the words sit between us, my expression unreadable. Then I asked, "What exactly have you done for me?" Silence. As if on cue, the twins toddled into the room, Noah clutching his favorite truck, Ava gripping my leg. My mother immediately switched tactics. "There's my precious grandbaby," she cooed, reaching out to Ava, who promptly turned away. I didn't stop her. I wanted them to see it. "They don't know you," I said simply. "You've seen them 3 times in their lives. You chose not to be involved." My father scoffed. "That's not fair. We're busy people." I tilted my head. "Too busy for your own grandchildren. Too busy to help your daughter through emergency surgery, but not too busy to ask for money?" The guilt trip started then. My mother's voice turned fragile. "Without your help, we'll lose everything." I met her gaze, unwavering. "I lost my husband," I said quietly. "My children lost their father, and we survived. You will too." 3 months later, they lost the house. Rebecca kept me updated, though I had little interest. They ended up in a modest condo, their grand 4,000-square-foot home now a casualty of their own entitlement. The boat was gone, sold at a loss, and they had finally unloaded the timeshare. But instead of accepting their own mistakes, they rewrote the narrative. "They're telling everyone you abandoned them after promising lifelong support," Rebecca sighed during one of our weekly visits. I just smirked, sipping my tea. "Let them talk," I said. "The truth speaks for itself." And it did. The extended family had turned on them, disgusted by their selfishness. Even my father's sister, who had always taken his side, reached out to me. "I had no idea what really happened, Sophia. I'm so sorry. I'd won, not just in the financial sense. I had freed myself from them, from their manipulation, their expectations, their toxic love. My life was finally my own. And for the first time, I was really living it. For the first time in my life, I was living on my own terms. With Diana's help, I'd moved into a cozy 3-bedroom house in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. It wasn't huge, but it had a backyard, something the twins had never had before. Instead of stretching every dollar to send my parents money, I was investing in us. My memorial website business was growing, allowing me to cut back on graphic design clients and focus on meaningful work. Isabel still helped with childcare a few days a week, but I'd structured my time so I could be there for Noah and Ava more. And the best part? I had real support now. Neighbors welcomed us with casseroles. My support group set up playdates. Rebecca, for the first time in our lives, was my sister rather than my competition. Even Danielle from the hospital would drop by with her kids. I had lost so much. Nathan, my parents, the illusion of what family should be, but somehow I had never felt less alone. Then, 6 months after my surgery, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. An actual handwritten letter from my mother. I almost tossed it straight into the trash, but curiosity got the better of me. What I found inside shocked me. It wasn't another guilt trip or manipulation attempt. It was an apology, a real one. "I've had time to reflect on my behavior," she wrote. "Watching you build a life without us has forced me to confront some painful truths. I was jealous of your independence, your resilience. I resented that you didn't need me the way I needed my own mother. But now I see you did need me, just not in the way I wanted to be needed. And when you reached out for help during your surgery, we failed you completely. I'm deeply sorry." She went on to say that she and my father had overhauled their finances. He'd taken a part-time job at a hardware store. They had sold most of their luxury possessions and were learning, for the first time in decades, how to live modestly. She didn't ask for money. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She only wanted me to know that she understood now. I showed the letter to Rebecca, who sighed. "They've been talking about writing to you for weeks. Dad fought it, but I think he's finally realizing how badly he screwed up, especially after the heart scare last month." I froze. "Heart scare?" Rebecca hesitated. "Just high blood pressure and chest pains." But it shook him. "He's actually listening to doctors now." I wasn't ready to reply right away. I needed time to process. Was this real, or just another tactic? That night, I dug out old family photos I hadn't looked at in years. Behind the smiles, I saw the patterns I'd once been blind to, how my parents had always performed the role of loving caregivers while putting their own needs first. A year after my surgery, I finally agreed to meet them. A neutral location, no expectations, no promises. When they walked into the cafe, I barely recognized them. My father, once so commanding, looked smaller, humbled. My mother's usual designer wardrobe had been replaced by something simple and practical. The twins stayed with Rebecca. I wasn't ready for a full reunion. We sat in awkward silence until my father did something unthinkable. He cried. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, his voice breaking, "and an even worse grandfather. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know, I see it now, how selfish we've been." My mother reached toward my hand, not quite touching it. "We've been in family therapy. Rebecca pushed us into it. We resisted, but it's changed us. I didn't rush to forgive them. I didn't pretend everything was fine. But I did share pictures of the twins. I told them about our home, our life. And for the first time ever, they listened, without interrupting, without making it about themselves. As we stood to leave, my father spoke again, hesitant. "Would it ever be possible for us to know our grandchildren?" I met his gaze. "That depends on your actions, not your words. If you're serious about change, we'll start with short, supervised visits. But understand this, my children will only have relationships with people who respect their mother." Walking away, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel rage. I felt powerful. For the first time, I was in control of my life, my choices, and my boundaries. Maybe my parents would change. Maybe they wouldn't. But I had already transformed. I was no longer a daughter desperate for approval. I was a mother, strong and unwavering, building the life my children and I deserved.